I spent years buying tomatoes at the grocery store, convinced they tasted just fine, until I picked my first sun-warmed cherry tomato straight off the vine in my own backyard. That single bite ruined store-bought tomatoes for me forever, and I am not exaggerating. The difference was so dramatic that I started growing everything I could get my hands on, and after more than a decade of trial and error, I have narrowed it down to 6 vegetables that taste so much better homegrown that eating the store-bought version honestly feels like a completely different food. Now, I want you to stick around for every single one of these, because the last vegetable on this list is the one that genuinely transformed how I think about flavor in the garden. I had been growing it wrong for years, and when I finally figured out the real secret, it was like tasting it for the first time all over again. Plus, after we get through all 6, I have a bonus tip for you, a little kitchen scrap trick that ties directly into getting even more flavor out of your homegrown harvest. And it costs you absolutely nothing. So let me walk you through what I have learned, starting with the one that surprised me most when I first grew it myself. Here is the principle that ties all of this together, and it took me way too long to understand it. Flavor in vegetables is not just about the variety you plant. It is about stress, sugar, and timing. When a vegetable is picked at its absolute peak, when the plant has had time to concentrate its sugars and develop complex flavor compounds in real soil with real sun, it tastes fundamentally different from something harvested early, shipped across the country in a refrigerated truck, and left sitting under fluorescent lights for a week. Once I stopped trying to make my garden look like a grocery store and started growing for taste instead of appearance, everything changed. So here's what actually tastes better when you grow it yourself. And more importantly, why? The first one I want to talk about is one that honestly embarrassed me when I finally grew it, because I realized I had been settling for a flavorless version my entire adult life. I am talking about green beans. Now I know what you might be thinking. Green beans? Really? But hear me out. I grew up eating canned green beans, and occasionally the fresh ones from the produce section that were always a little rubbery and kind of bland. Then one summer, I planted a variety called Provider, which is a classic bush bean, and I picked them right at about 5 inches long, maybe 6 days after the flowers appeared. The snap when I broke one in half was so crisp, it startled me. And the flavor was sweet, almost grassy in the best possible way, with this brightness that I had never tasted in a green bean before. The reason is simple. Green beans start losing their sugars the moment they are picked. A study out of the University of California, Davis found that green beans can lose up to 40% of their sugar content within the first 24 hours after harvest. So by the time a store-bought bean reaches your kitchen, you are eating a shadow of what it could have been. My recommendation is to grow a bush variety like Provider or Contender. Pick them young and tender and eat them within an hour of harvest if you can. The difference will genuinely shock you. Now, that discovery with green beans led me straight to the next vegetable, because once I started paying attention to how quickly flavor degrades after harvest, I realized there was another vegetable in my garden that was even more dramatic. Peas. Sweet peas, specifically sugar snap peas, are the single most time-sensitive vegetable I have ever grown when it comes to flavor. I planted Super Sugar Snap one spring, and I made the mistake of picking a big basket in the morning and not eating them until that evening. They were fine. They were good. But the next day, I went out and ate one right off the vine, still warm from the sun, and it was like candy. I am not being poetic here. The sugar content in peas begins converting to starch within hours of being picked. Research from Oregon State University Extension confirms that peas can lose up to 50% of their sweetness in just 6 hours at room temperature. That is why store-bought sugar snap peas always taste a little starchy and flat compared to what you can grow at home. Plant them in early spring as soon as your soil hits about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Give them a simple trellis about 5 feet tall and pick them every single day once they start producing. Eat them standing right there in the garden. That is the real experience. Here is one that seems almost too obvious to include, but I promise there is a deeper reason than you might think, and it connects perfectly to what we just talked about with sugar loss after harvest. Tomatoes. Yes, I know. Everyone says homegrown tomatoes taste better, but most people do not understand exactly why, and that misunderstanding leads to a mistake I made for 3 straight seasons. When I first started growing tomatoes, I picked them as soon as they turned red. That was my metric. Red equals ripe, right? Wrong. I was picking them days too early. A tomato that finishes ripening on the vine develops dramatically higher levels of volatile compounds, the aromatic chemicals that give a tomato its complex flavor. Researchers at the University of Florida identified over 400 volatile compounds in tomatoes, and the key ones, the ones responsible for that incredible smell and taste, only reach their peak in the final 2 to 3 days of vine ripening. The grocery store cannot wait for that. They pick tomatoes at what is called the mature green stage or the breaker stage, then gas them with ethylene to turn them red. They look like tomatoes, but they are missing the flavor architecture that only develops on the plant. So here's what I do now. I grow varieties like Brandywine, Cherokee Purple, or Sun Gold cherry tomatoes, and I leave them on the vine until they feel slightly soft when I press them gently with my thumb. Not mushy, just yielding. That extra day or two makes all the difference. And if you are in a shorter growing season, Sun Gold cherries are incredible because they mature in about 55 to 60 days, and the flavor is absolutely outstanding. Now, if you are finding these tips helpful and you want a complete system for growing more food from what you already have in your kitchen, I put together something called the 30-Day Kitchen Scrap Garden Protocol. It is a 171-page guide that covers 31 different crops you can regrow from scraps, plus a $10 starter kit guide, so you do not have to spend a fortune getting started. It also includes zero-waste kitchen strategies and full troubleshooting support for every crop. You can grab it for just $17 at backyardbuddybooks.com. Just scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description. All right, let us keep going, because the next few on this list are real game changers, especially if you have been buying these vegetables at the store your whole life. This next one took me a while to figure out, and I want to be straight with you. I almost gave up on growing it because my first few attempts were so disappointing. Carrots. My first year growing carrots, I planted them in a raised bed that had heavy, chunky soil with bits of uncomposted wood in it. The carrots came out forked, stubby, and honestly kind of bitter. I thought maybe I just was not meant to grow carrots. But the problem was not me. It was the soil. Carrots need loose, stone-free soil at least 12 inches deep to develop properly. Once I filled a dedicated bed with a mix of roughly equal parts sifted compost, coconut coir, and coarse sand, everything changed. The carrots grew straight, smooth, and incredibly sweet. I grew a variety called Nantes Scarlet that year, and my neighbor, who had been gardening for 30 years, tasted one and asked me what variety it was because she said it was the sweetest carrot she had ever eaten. Here is why homegrown carrots taste so much better. Commercial carrots are bred for shelf life, uniform shape, and the ability to survive mechanical harvesting. Flavor is not the priority. When you grow your own, you can choose varieties that were selected specifically for taste, things like Napoli, Yaya, or Cosmic Purple. And you harvest them at exactly the right time, usually around 60 to 70 days for Nantes types, when the sugars are at their peak. One more thing. If you can, leave your carrots in the ground into early fall. A light frost, just down to about 28 degrees Fahrenheit, actually triggers the carrot to convert starch into sugar as a natural antifreeze response. Those frost-kissed carrots are absurdly sweet. I learned that trick from an old extension bulletin out of the University of Vermont, and it completely changed my carrot game. Now, speaking of vegetables that benefit from a little bit of cold, this one is something most people either love or hate, and I am convinced the people who hate it have just never had a good one. I am talking about spinach. Store-bought spinach, even the so-called fresh bunches, usually tastes flat and a bit metallic to me. And those pre-washed bags in the plastic clamshells, I will be honest, they taste like wet paper. When I started growing Bloomsdale long-standing spinach in my own garden, it was a revelation. The leaves were thick, almost succulent, with a rich, slightly sweet, earthy flavor that I had never associated with spinach before. The reason comes down to something called oxalic acid and how it interacts with growing conditions. Spinach that is grown quickly in hot weather bolts fast and develops higher concentrations of oxalic acid, which gives it that sharp, unpleasant bitterness. Commercially grown spinach is often pushed to grow as fast as possible for maximum yield. When you grow your own, you can plant it in early spring or fall when temperatures are between 35 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Cool temperatures slow the growth just enough for the leaves to develop more complex sugars and a mellower flavor profile. I plant mine about 4 to 6 weeks before my last expected frost in spring, spacing seeds about 3 inches apart in rows 8 inches apart. I harvest by cutting outer leaves when they are about 4 inches long, leaving the crown to keep producing. One bed, roughly 4 feet by 4 feet, gives me more spinach than my wife and I can eat for weeks, and the taste is worlds apart from anything I have ever bought at a store. It is one of those vegetables where growing it yourself does not just improve the flavor a little, it transforms the entire experience of eating it. All right, here's the last one, and this is the one I mentioned. At the very beginning, the one that genuinely changed how I think about growing for flavor. After years of getting this wrong, figuring it out felt like unlocking a secret that had been right in front of me the whole time. I am talking about lettuce. Now, I can almost hear some of you thinking, lettuce? Lettuce is lettuce, and I completely understand that reaction because I thought the exact same thing for years. I grew lettuce, I picked lettuce, it tasted like, well, lettuce. Mildly green, a little watery. Basically just a vehicle for salad dressing. Then one fall, almost by accident, I did something different that changed everything. I had been growing a mix of buttercrunch, red oak leaf, and a French heirloom variety called Merveille de Quatre Saisons. It was late October, and I had sort of forgotten about the lettuce bed because I was focused on putting my tomato beds to rest for the season. When I finally went back to harvest, we had already had several nights in the low 30s, and I figured the lettuce would be done. But it was not done. It was thriving. And when I tasted a leaf of that buttercrunch, I actually stopped walking and just stood there in my garden. The flavor was buttery, sweet, almost nutty, with a complexity I had never tasted in any lettuce, homegrown or otherwise. What I did not understand at the time, but later learned from research published by the University of New Hampshire Extension, is that lettuce responds to cold temperatures much like carrots do. When nighttime temperatures drop into the low 30s, the plant increases sugar production as a protective mechanism. Those sugars accumulate in the leaves, resulting in lettuce that tastes richer, sweeter, and more complex than anything grown in warm conditions. And here's the part I had been getting wrong for years. I was always growing my best lettuce in spring and early summer when temperatures were climbing. The lettuce grew fast, looked beautiful, but the flavor was always just okay. It would bolt quickly, turn bitter, and I would rip it out feeling frustrated. Once I shifted my primary lettuce growing season to fall, planting seeds in late August or early September about a 1/4 inch deep and keeping them moist until germination, everything changed. The fall crop grew more slowly, the leaves stayed tender longer, and the flavor was in a completely different category. I also started using a simple row cover, just a lightweight fabric draped over wire hoops, which let me extend the harvest well into November and even December in my zone. Some mornings I would lift the row cover and find the leaves lightly frosted, glistening in the early sun. And those were the best salads I have ever made in my life. If you have only ever grown lettuce in spring, please try a fall crop this year. Plant at least 3 different varieties for a mix of flavors and textures. Harvest in the morning after a cold night. I genuinely believe this will change how you think about salad, and it's certainly changed how I think about growing for flavor in general. Now, before I share that bonus tip I promised, let me walk through a few common mistakes I see people make when they are trying to grow vegetables for better flavor, because honestly, I made every single one of these myself. The first is picking too early. We get excited, the vegetable looks ready, and we grab it. But most vegetables, especially tomatoes, peppers, and melons, develop their best flavor in the final few days of ripening. A better approach is to wait 1 to 2 days past when you think it is ready. Check the feel, the aroma, and the color, rather than just the size. I lost count of how many mediocre tomatoes I picked just because they looked red enough. The second mistake is overwatering in the final week before harvest. I used to water everything on the same schedule right up to the day I picked it, but many vegetables, tomatoes especially, develop more concentrated flavor if you reduce watering slightly in the last 5 to 7 days before harvest. The mild stress concentrates the sugars and flavor compounds. I am not talking about letting the plant wilt, just backing off from your usual schedule by about 1/3. The third one is ignoring variety selection. I did this for years, just buying whatever transplant was available at the garden center, but the variety you choose has a massive impact on flavor. A Brandywine tomato and a standard hybrid beefsteak are not even in the same conversation when it comes to taste. Seek out varieties that were bred for flavor rather than shipping durability. Seed catalogs from companies like Johnny's Selected Seeds or Territorial Seed Company often include flavor ratings, which I have found to be surprisingly accurate. And the fourth is growing in depleted soil. I have seen so many gardeners, myself included in my early years, plant in the same tired soil season after season without adding compost or organic matter. Nutrient-rich soil produces more flavorful vegetables. A couple inches of quality compost worked into the top of your beds each spring makes a noticeable difference in how your food tastes, not just how it grows. All right, here is that bonus tip I promised, and this one ties directly into getting the most flavor out of your homegrown harvest without spending an extra dime. If you save the root ends of your green onions, those little white nubs with the tiny roots still attached, you can stick them directly into a pot of moist soil about 1 inch deep, and they will regrow into full green onions in about 2 to 3 weeks. Now, here is the flavor connection. Fresh-cut green onions from your own garden have a brightness and a mild, sweet heat that store-bought green onions simply do not have. Store-bought green onions are often 2 weeks old by the time you buy them, and that sharp, almost acrid bite you sometimes get is actually a sign of age and stress during transport, not freshness. When you regrow them from scraps and cut them just seconds before adding them to a dish, the flavor is clean, sweet, and vibrant. I keep a small pot of regrowing green onions on my back porch year-round, and I trim them with kitchen scissors right before dinner. It is the easiest, most flavorful scrap garden project I have ever done, and it is a perfect entry point if you are curious about the whole kitchen scrap gardening approach. Now, if today's tips got you thinking about how much more you could be growing from what you already have on hand, I really want to mention the 30-day kitchen scrap garden protocol one more time. It is the complete guide I wish I had when I started doing this. Inside those 171 pages, you will find step-by-step instructions for regrowing 31 different crops from kitchen scraps, a $10 starter kit guide so you know exactly what to buy and nothing more, zero-waste kitchen strategies that save money every single week, and complete troubleshooting support for when things do not go as planned, because trust me, things will not always go as planned, and that is perfectly okay. It is available for just $17 at backyardbuddybooks.com. You can scan the QR code on screen right now or click the link down in the description. It is the kind of resource that pays for itself the first week you use it, and I genuinely think it will change how you look at your kitchen scraps forever. So we started today talking about how one sun-warmed cherry tomato ruined store-bought produce for me forever. And I hope after going through these 6 vegetables, you can see why growing your own truly delivers a flavor experience that no grocery store can match. I would love to hear from you. Which of these are you going to try growing this season? Or is there a vegetable you have grown that tasted so much better homegrown that it belongs on this list? Drop it in the comments because I learn just as much from you as you do from me. And that is what makes this community so special. Happy gardening, and I will see you in the next one.